Hello everyone and welcome to the YouTube channel of Being ACCA. This is Tushita Gupta, ACCA affiliate, and in this video we are going to be solving the section A and B questions from your December 23 examiner's report. So the examiner's report will always consist of important questions, so the questions which are particularly, like it's mentioned over here, particularly difficult for candidates. So these are the questions that we will be solving today, and let's get started. So first of all, we have the section A questions provided to us. Let's get to the first one. Which two of the following? So always remember to check in an MCQ that how many options are you supposed to be selecting? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? At times there are multiple responses that you have to select, and if you only select, like if there are 4 asked and you only select 3, then you lose your marks over there. So it's very important to note how many responses are we supposed to choose. So we have to choose 2 statements concerning the assumptions of CVP analysis which are true. So it is mentioned over here also that this question, this is testing the understanding of the assumptions that are there in the CVP analysis, and those assumptions, because these are like the restrictions, so these are also the limitations of the analysis that we are doing. So let's read the statements and understand which one of them is true, and if it's false, then why is it false. So the first statement says that the contribution per unit is constant with respect to the volume. So this statement is absolutely correct. Why? Because in CVP we have learned that there is a constant selling price. How do we calculate the contribution? The contribution is nothing but the sales price minus your variable cost. So when we are using CVP analysis, we assume that your selling price remains constant and your variable cost also remains constant per unit. That is why your contribution per unit is also constant with respect to the volume. So this is why the first statement is correct. Moving on to option B. Option B says total fixed costs will reduce as the volume increases. So, fixed costs in totality in CVP analysis, we have learned that they are assumed to be constant. So even if the volume increases, these fixed costs will remain constant and will not reduce. So that is why this statement is wrong. Now, the third statement says to increase the demand, the selling price per unit must be reduced. But like we discussed in the very first statement, that CVP analysis assumes that your selling price per unit is supposed to be constant under CVP. So to increase the demand, the selling price per unit will not be reduced. Hence, this is not an assumption under CVP. Although this statement in general is true, if I want to sell more of my product, I will reduce the price to try to sell more of it. But this is not an assumption of the CVP analysis. Usually, under exam situations, we would think that if a statement is generally true, we will take it as our answer, but this has nothing to do with your CVP analysis. Then we have the last statement, the D statement, all costs can be classified as either fixed or variable. Now, this statement is also true because under CVP analysis, what we assume is that we have a pool of costs. The total pool of costs can be divided into fixed costs, which remain the same irrespective of how much we produce, and the variable cost, which change with our level of production. So if I am producing more, I'm going to have to spend more on my labor. If I'm producing more, I'm going to have to spend more on my materials. So that is how this statement is true. That is how we assume in the CVP analysis that all your costs can be classified as either fixed or variable. Now, moving to the last statement, it is best suited as a long-term planning tool. So instead of it being a long-term tool, it's rather a short-term planning tool, because the assumption that we took that everything is going to remain constant. So this assumption is not very true in the long term. In the short term, yes, you can keep few things constant, but in the long term there might be growth, there might be a sudden downfall, probably some disease has spread in the world. So CVP analysis is more suited for short term and not long term. That is why this statement is also wrong. So we have our answer as option A and option D. So these are the two statements that we have selected as our answer. Now let's see over here. A and D are your answers, and the reasoning is also given in the examiner's report. If you wish, you can go through the reasoning also. Now moving on to example 2. Prest company sells 3 products, R, S and T. The following information is available for the last period. So we have the sales volume, the actual sales, the standard margin and the actual margin. So standard margin is something that we were planning we will achieve, and actual margin is something that we have actually achieved. So over here we have to calculate the total. So that means we have to take into account all 3 products. Favorable sales quantity variance to the nearest dollar. So let's work this out. How we can work this out is, first of all, for R, S and T, let's make some space over here. So this is our product R, this is our product S, and this is our product T. So what do we actually consider when we are calculating the sales quantity variance? So first of all, we will write down how much should be our standard quantity in our standard mix. So standard quantity in your standard mix. So that is given to us 1500, 900, 2600, 1500, 900 and 2600, the total of which comes out to 5000. Right? So this is our standard quantity in standard mix. Now we are going to be writing actual quantity in our standard mix. First of all, we are having a look at the sales quantity variance. So we are only concerned here that how much quantity we should have sold and how much have we actually sold. So the actual quantity is also so for the actual quantity to make it in the standard mix. So actually the total sales volume is 6000. So according to the ratio of my standard quantity in standard mix, I will find out how, if I would have sold 5000, this is the quantity that I should have sold in. Now that I have sold 6000, I need to find out how much is the quantity according to the standards of each of these individual if I have made a total sales of 6000. So I'm going to do nothing but simply 1500 by 5000 multiplied by 6000. This will give me my R that I should have produced, that I should have sold if my quantity was 6000. So if I just run that on my calculator, 1500 divided by 5000 multiplied by 6000 gives me 1800. So 1800 is something that I should have sold if 6000 was my total quantity. Similarly, I'll do it for S and T. So for S, it will be 900 divided by 5000. 900 divided by 5000 multiplied by 6000, which is my actual sales. So this I get 1080, and again taking 2600, dividing that by 5000 and then multiplying this by 6000, I have my answer as 3120. So this is the quantity that I should have sold now that I have sold 6000 units. So this is how I have worked out my actual quantity in my standard mix. So now I will see the difference. Let's see the difference. So if I check out the difference, I have sold 1500 was the plan and I have sold 1800. So that means 300 is the extra that I have sold, and anything extra is good for me because more the sales, more the profits. So it's a favorable variance. Then I have 900 should have been sold and I have sold 1080. Again, this is something favorable for me. So this gives me 180 favorable. Then 2600 should have been sold and I have sold 3120, which means I have a favorable of 520. So this is nothing but the difference between these two columns, standard quantity in standard mix and actual quantity in your actual mix. So this is the difference. And then we will multiply this by the standard margin. So the standard margin we have with us 5, 6 and 7. So the multiplication, 300 multiplied by 5 will give me 1500 favorable. Please excuse my bad handwriting. 1080 favorable for the second one, and 520 multiplied by 7 gives me 3640 favorable. So all in all, my variance will be the sum of these three figures, and the sum of these three figures is 6220 and this is my total favorable variance. Favorable was already mentioned in the question, so you just had to type in 6220s without any commas or decimal points. So this is how we solve this one. Now you can refer to the solution here as well. Then you have your next example. The next section A question that the examiner has told was not something that many students were able to solve. So let's see what we have got in this one. Now, Lake Company has an operating gearing of 160%. It calculates, so the formula is also given to you. You do not even need to remember the formula. Dividing the contribution by operating profit. So we can form an equation that contribution upon operating profit is 160%, right? How much will Lake Company's operating profit fall by if its sales volume reduces by 20% to the nearest whole percentage? We have to give our answers. So first of all, so over here also we see that operating profit, no, I have made a mistake over here. Contribution is divided by the operating profit. So that means operating profit comes in your numerator and your contribution comes in the denominator. So if I say that the contribution is 160 and your operating profit is 100, that means you have your fixed costs which are 60. So you have contribution as 160 and then you have your operating profit as 100. So this is the equation that you have, and contribution is nothing but your operating profit minus your so you have your operating profit plus your fixed costs give you your contribution. So because contribution is something that you obtain just by taking SP minus variable costs, and selling the fixed cost is something that you subtract later on. So if I just add my if I add my operating profit and my fixed cost, I will be able to get my contribution. So if I just transpose this equation, I will have my fixed cost as contribution minus my operating profit. So 160 minus 100, I get my fixed cost as 60. So we have to find out how much will the operating profit fall if the sale volume reduces by 20%. So if we just see how this will be impacted. So if my sales, like it said over here, the sales volume reduces by 20%, so the fall in your sales volume will affect your contribution also, because contribution is nothing but sales price minus your variable cost. So if this goes down, this will also go down. So let's see how this will be getting impacted. So if 160 was something that I was earning as a contribution, now 20% is going to be gone. So 160 into 20%. So if you find that out, that will come to 32, if I'm not wrong. 160 multiplied by 20% gives you 32. So 32 is your reduction in the contribution. So the revised contribution will be 160 minus 32. So 160 minus 32 will give you 128. But your fixed costs will still remain the same, because we have studied that no matter how much we are producing, the fixed cost is something which remains constant. So the fixed cost which we had calculated as 60 remains the same. So how is our operating profit going to look like now? So my operating profit will be nothing but 128 minus my fixed costs, which are still going to remain 60. So this is how I will get my operating profit as 68. And this is we'll see how this has reduced the ratio that we are the operating, how we have to calculate how much the operating profit will fall by. So the difference we can find out by 100 minus 68 divided by 100, and this will give us the fall, because earlier my operating profit was 100. So how do we find out the change? The change is nothing but older value minus the new value, dividing that by the older value. So this is how I arrive at my change, and if you arrive at this will give you 32%, which is your answer. So the examiner has also given an easy way to calculate this. So the easy way will be nothing but we have seen that 160% was the ratio given to us over here, operating gearing of 160%, and that will be reduced by, because 20% is the fall in volume. So if you multiply that by 20%, you straight away get 32%, which ultimately was your answer. A lot of people may not understand why we have calculated it this way, but the longer method can still be like, this is the breakup of how and why we are doing things the way that we are doing them. My apologies. Moving to example 4, Rotag company manufactures cement. It has decided to improve its image with regard to environmental issues and is hoping that the new activity based costing approach being introduced will help the company to better allocate the environmental costs that it incurs. Which two of the following environmental costs would be better allocated as a result of the introduction of ABC? So now we all know how ABC helps. ABC will help you to get a more clearer allocation, more fair allocation of the costs that are being incurred out of the total cost pool. It is going to separate what is causing what costs, and accordingly it will allocate them. So let's have a look at the statements. Normal material losses from a wasteful manufacturing process. Let's read the statements once. Salary costs of the supervisor at Rotag company's CO2 emissions purification process. So I can see that this is something which the environment is directly affected by the CO2 emissions. And then we also have off-site costs of training staff to follow relevant environmental safety procedures when they are making the product. So this also sounds something which could be like an environmental cost. Increased hours, hourly wages paid to compensate staff for working with toxic gases. So here let's read what the examiner has told about this. All of the costs suggested are environmental costs associated with the manufacturing. ABC will best suit for the allocation of overheads based upon specific activities that are undertaken that cause the costs to be incurred. So although the question is around environmental costs, your knowledge of ABC will be of assistance over here. Definitely, you are being asked about ABC. So the salary cost of the purification supervisor is an overhead which could be allocated to the production based on the levels of CO2 emissions, which are required as a result of why we are doing the production. And staff training is again an overhead. Now, if you have a look closely at option A and option D, the material losses arising from wasteful process is something which relates to our production, and again hourly wages again talks about the daily like the direct labor which is involved over here. However, if you see the emissions purification and off-site training, these are all overheads. These relate directly to the production, but B and C are your overheads, and ABC allocates overheads. So that is why B and C are the relevant options over here. Now we have some section B questions also. So in this section, we will look in detail at a case covering activity-based costing from your syllabus area B, specialist cost and management accounting techniques. So it's very common that you get questions like these in your section B. It's always better that you practice these questions from the examiner reports also. So we have Rase Company. Rase Company manufactures 3 types of guitars in one of its divisions, jazz, rock, and the classic. Rase Company currently operates a costing system which uses single overhead rate based on the revenue to charge overhead cost to the guitars. The finance director has suggested a change. Okay, so this is like the information that we have. And then we have the questions also given to us. So we have to find out the profit per unit of a jazz guitar using the current basis of charging overhead cost to two decimal places. So probably they are having like a system in place where they are charging the overheads with some other method. The questions like these are very common. Usually they will be using their own method, and then they will be asking you if ABC should be implemented for this organization. So let's dive into this. We have to find out the profit per unit of the jazz guitar using the current basis for charging the overhead. So we let's go to the information that is given to us. So they currently operate a system which uses single overhead rate based on revenue to charge overhead costs. So let's see how they are currently also allocating their costs, and then we'll find out if ABC is any good to them. So currently, if I find out the profit per unit on jazz, so I have my what all will I be taking? Selling price, then I have my prime cost, which is the direct cost, and then I will also be taking into account my overheads. So this is about the number of components that are produced and sold. This is the production size. This is the setup and everything. So we do have like the costs given to us. So we have 40,810 spent on quality, 120,000 spent on machine, and 643 spent on component processing. So if I just add all of these costs to find my total overheads, so my total overheads will come out to be 804,450. So this is my total overheads. And now they are saying that they charge the overheads based on revenue. So this is my total cost, or I should say total overheads, total overheads. And then I can find out how much my revenue is. So revenue will be nothing but the number of components we are selling multiplied by the selling price. So I will take the number of components 5,000, multiply that by 620, 6,000 multiplied by 700, 3,000 multiplied by 450. So this is how I will be arriving at my revenue. And if I just work that calculation out, my revenue is going to come out to be 8650 8650,000. So this is how my revenue is going to get worked out. Now I have to find out how much is my overhead absorption rate, that how many dollars am I charging to each of these units. So they do not differentiate, and they will just find out a standard absorption rate and will be using for the same for jazz, rock, and classic. So how do we go to that is we find out the overhead absorption rate. The overhead absorption rate will be nothing but your total overheads divided by the revenue that we are earning. So this total costs divided by your revenue, which we just worked out, 8650,000. So this is how we work out the absorption rate, and this will come out to 0.093 per dollar of your revenue. That means if I'm earning a revenue of $1, this is the amount of overheads that I'm going to be charging to that product. So perhaps for one jazz, my selling price is 620, so I'm earning a revenue of 620. So I will multiply 620 with 0.093 to arrive at the overhead that I'm charging for that. So let's work out the profit. We have to find out the profit. So profit is going to be nothing but your selling price. So for jazz, you have your selling price at 620. 620 minus we will be taking the prime cost, that's very important, 370. And then I think it's just the overheads that we have to account for. Yes. So now the overheads that we need to account for, like I told you, 620 is the revenue that I'm making. So for every $1, it's 0.093. So for $620, it will be 620 multiplied by 0.93. So I will just take here 620 and multiply that by 0.093. And this will give me the overheads that I'm going to apportion to my jazz. So if you calculate this, you will find your answer as 192.34, which is option A. So this is how you solve the first question of the section B. Now let's get ahead with the second one. They have also explained why option B, C, and D were wrong. So if you want, you can go through these as well, just to understand that what were the mistakes that students made. So usually they will give you closer options so that you get confused. They call them distractors. Now let's go to the second one. Using activity-based costing, we have to find out the machine setup cost for a rock guitar to 2 decimal places. So first of all, let's work out the cost pool and cost overhead according to that. We have to find it for machine setup for rock guitar. So machine setup, this is the number of machines set up. This is the cost that we have incurred in setting up the machines, and machine setup per batches. These many we have done for each batch. So first of all, what we are going to have to do over here is that we find out how many batches were run, because then we will have to multiply this by the number of batches that there were there, so that we find out how many total setups were done, so that we are able to find the cost per setup. So we would need some space to work out this calculation. I think we'll have to use this only. Right. So this can be about jazz, this can be about rock, and this can be about classic. And then let's find out the batches. So for the batches, we know that the total number of units that we have sold is 5,000, and in every one batch there are 100 that are made. So if I divide 5,000, if I just calculate 5,000 by 100, I will be able to get how many batches were made. So 5,000 divided by 100 gives me 50. Similarly, 6,000 divided by 150 will give me the number of batches, and similarly again for 3,000 divided by 200. So this is how I can work out the number of batches that were there. So for jazz, it'll come out to be 50. For rock, it'll come out to be 40. And for classic, it'll come out to be 15. So this is the number of batches that we have made. And the setups per batch are already given to us. So for every batch, there would be 3 setups needed, 3, 5, and 4. So here I have Yes. So we were at the setups that are needed. So the setups per batch were 3, 5, and 4. 3, 5, and 4. The similar calculation is performed here. So instead of making a mess above, I can just refer to this. So these are the batches, like I told how this is calculated. Then we have the setups per batch, and then we will find out the total setups. So there were 50 batches, and every batch required 3 setups. So we will multiply 50 by 3. That means 150 setups in total were required for jazz, similarly for rock, similarly for classic. So in total there were 410 setups, and the cost for the machine setups is also given to us as 124.10. So we divide that by the number of setups there were to find out the cost per setup, like for one setup how much cost was incurred. So this is the total cost and divided by the number of setups that there were there. So we find that the cost per setup was $294, and then we will multiply that and divide that for like the total number of the things that there were, to find out how much is our machine cost going to be for a rock guitar. So we see that we have 294 per setup cost, and we have to find it for let's have a look at the requirement for a rock guitar. So for one rock guitar we have to find this out, and we have to find out the machine setup cost only. So we know that 294 is the cost per setup, and for the rock guitar we are doing total number of setups is 200, and 200 that will be divided by how many units there were, because we wanted per unit. So 294 multiplied by 200 will give me the total cost which has been incurred for rock, and we have to find that out per unit. So that is why we divide that by 6,000 to get our answer per unit. So 9.8 is something, the total machine cost, which will be apportioned to one rock guitar. So this is how we work out the second question. Then moving on to the third one, using ABC, we have to find out the cost of component processing for classic guitar. So again, the process will be very similar. We have the number of units that were there in the question itself, and then we have the, now this is about processing. So we have taken processing time per unit. So per unit, this is the processing time 453. This will be given in the question. So this is the processing time 4, 5, and 3. So this is already given in the question to you, and you multiply this with the number of units that you have made to find out how many processing hours were used for each of these three products. And this is how you work out that this is the total processing hours that were used. And now we will find out that if this is the total number of hours, and we have the total cost of processing also. So in the question, we see that the total cost of component processing was 643,100. So if I just divide that by how many hours of component processing was done, I will be able to work out how much is the cost for processing for 1 hour. So this is the total cost, dividing that by the number of hours. So this is how I will get per hour cost. And now we have to find it for a classic guitar. So for classic one, we already know that 10.9 is per hour, and for every one unit will take you 3 hours. So if you multiply that by 3, you will find out that this is the cost that we are going to be apportioning to every classic guitar when it comes to component processing cost. And with this, we have done the question 3 also. Here are the distractors and explained why they could have been the possible answers, or why they would have distracted that possibly this is the correct one. So moving on to question number 4 now. Which of the following statements concerning the advantages of activity-based costing as opposed to traditional costing is true? So we have to find out the advantage of ABC. Now, all overhead costs will be accurately linked with a measurable cost driver, which will facilitate the control of all overhead costs. So when it comes to ABC, we know that it is a very good method of absorbing your overheads. But when it comes to, no method is perfect. Every method will have certain limitations. When it comes to ABC, it will accurately link your costs to a more fair and more accurate absorption method, but it will not allocate all the overhead costs with a measurable cost driver. There are some costs, it is possible that for some costs you're not able to find a measurable cost driver. So maybe you will have to apportion those specific overheads, probably according to labor hours, probably according to revenue, whatever you think is a feasible way. So again, if you see the explanation that ACCA has given for the same, is that ABC is limited in as much as it will still have an element of arbitrary allocation. Again, not all costs can be definitely linked to a cost driver. So that is why this statement is wrong, like I just explained. Costing will be more accurate when overheads are a small proportion of your total costs. So ABC is used to apportion the overhead costs, but if your overheads are a very small proportion of your total costs, that means the allocation of those overheads will not impact you much because the proportion overall is less. ABC is rather more useful when it comes to organizations where overheads are a major part of their total costs and the direct ones are very less. Overheads are more present in those organizations, and they will benefit from a more fair allocation. So that is why this statement is also wrong. You can read over here that ABC gives more accurate costing when overheads are a large proportion of the total costs, not the small proportion. Then we come to the C statement. Short-term decision making will be more meaningful because all fixed proportion overheads are included in the calculations. Now this is also wrong, because your absorption costing also includes your fixed overheads, so there will be no advantage that you will have over there. And usually in short term, we assume that your fixed costs are irrelevant, so that is why statement C is not your correct answer. Then costing will be more accurate as it recognizes the activities are consumed at different rates by different products. Now, this is definitely true. This is also an advantage of ABC as opposed to the traditional one. The traditional one will probably use direct material or direct labor hours to apportion these costs, but ABC will give you a more accurate costing because it recognizes or it, establishes that probably some resource is making some product uses more of probably machine setup than the other one. So that is how it will fairly allocate the costs, overhead costs that are there, and will give you a more accurate pricing also for your products. So that is why statement D is right and ABC are wrong. Then you go to question number 5. This is the last one. The finance director is pleased with the results of the ABC analysis of the guitars and is keen to extend the use of ABC to other divisions in the company. One such division, which manufactures electronic keyboards, has begun to introduce ABC and has identified some relevant activities and cost drivers. So we have to match the most appropriate cost driver to the activities that have been identified. So let's try to have a look at what are the possible options and what can, this possibly be matched to. So we have the number of service requests. So service requests cannot be about material handling. It can be about customer service. Then you have your IT support, procurement, and your maintenance. So when it comes to your IT support, the number of service requests can be directly linked to each other. So this is how we can match these. And then the number of material movements. So material movements will basically be handled by material handling. So this is how this is the cost driver and this is the activity that we have. And then the number of purchase orders. So purchase orders is something which the procurement department takes care of. So the procurement department will be incurring more costs if there are more purchase orders. Then you have your number of machine hours. So machine hours is going to be directly linked to your maintenance because the more that you use your machines, the more maintenance are they going to ask. So this is how number of machine hours is linked to maintenance. Then we have the number of warranties that they are handling. So when it comes to the warranties, so the customer service is going to deal with the warranty guys. So all the customers who are asking that we had a warranty, we want the service. So the customer service will be dealing with the number of warranties that we are handling. So this is how we are linking these activities with the possible cost drivers that they have. Always remember, like we studied in this statement over here, that it will not be possible to allocate all overheads to a measurable cost driver. There may be some costs which you are not able to link for sure to a cost driver, and this will make this is indeed one of the limitations of ABC. So with this we have finished the section A and section B questions that were there in the September 23 examiner's report. Section C is something which is there on the practice platform, and it's better that if we solve that over there. So in the coming series of videos, you will find me solving section A and section B questions from all the examiner reports that are currently available on the ACCA website. So please stay tuned for more videos solving these questions. Solving these questions, like I emphasized in the beginning of the video, is important because when you solve these questions, you will be able to you will be getting to know what are the common mistakes that the students are making and how you can avoid making the same mistakes in your real exam, and this definitely gives you a very good practice of some high level questions. So this is it about this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful.